God bless everybody. I am just going to dive into the deep end today, trusting in the Holy Spirit as my lifeboat, because I have no idea where to grab this tiger. So I think I'll start by trying to lay a framework borrowed from Norman Dodd. I talked about Norman Dodd in a video maybe a month ago or so, a few weeks ago. And what Norman Dodd talked about, Norman Dodd was born in 1899. He died in the early 80s. Sorry. In 1953, he was part of a congressional investigation that looked into tax-exempt foundations, such as the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, the Ford Foundation, and it didn't exist at that time, but the Bill and Melinda Gates Fund would have fallen into the category of such organizations as what he looked at. So, this is where I'm going to start. And just give you kind of an overview. I'll link the video of what Norman Dodd said. There are two videos of him being interviewed. They are two separate interviews. But he wrote a book on this subject, and he has no doubt told that story countless times. Charlotte Iserby, you may or may not know who she is. She told the story of her talking to Norman Dodd, and he told the same story the same way. So over the years, he began to, it's kind of like the story that you tell that gets told every Thanksgiving about how you peed on yourself in the second grade. They always tell the same story the same way, as embarrassing as it is. I'm trying to think, did I pee on myself in the second grade? Never mind. Sorry about that. So Norman Dodd. Norman Dodd, being born in 1899, lived through the Great Depression. He was a young man working in banking at that time. So he was assigned the task of analyzing what had happened. How did they go from booming prosperity to being in an insolvent bank, seemingly overnight? So he investigated this for his bank for 2 years. Then he came back and made a report, and his recommendation was the United States needs to return to sound banking. Now, to better tell you what sound banking is, I'll tell you what he referred to as unsound banking, and that is speculative activities that are encouraged by and characterize our economy. Banks loaning money and encouraging the speculative activities rather than sound investment practices that will build an economy for the long haul and for the good of the most people in the country. Speculative activities are kind of hit it and quit it type things, where people who get in early lead the way into something that seems like it's going to be the next great thing. Other people follow them into it because the price shoots up. Those people that follow them into it, if you get out quick enough, you make a lot of money. Because you're taking the money that the last people invested. Maybe if you don't get out soon enough, you just don't make any money. But if you're the suckers on the tail end, you lose your shirt. And the people who started the scam or got in early on the investment walk away and they're laughing all the way to their estate in their Bentley. And this happens over and over and over and over again. And the banking institutions, he concluded, were encouraged this. So an investment is made not because it is a sound investment, not because it is a good investment, but because it will make money. It doesn't matter if it is honest. And what I want to say is, not only does it not matter if it's honest, people can know it is dishonest. But if they individually are going to make money, then this is allowed to continue. If you know that the only people who are going to make money are the people who get in on the ground floor, and a lot of these people who deal in the stock market and other investment firms and stuff like that, they will participate in risky things, thinking that even though this is not sound investment, it is done because it makes money. If you want to learn more about what I'm trying to say with that, you can look at this thing called the futures market. It's not really the stock market. It's investing in stocks, but it's kind of like making side bets on the stock market. And this is a legitimate form of investing. People make a living doing this. They aren't buying or selling anything. They aren't contributing to the economy. If anything, they are driving up the price of resources, goods, and materials that people need every day by speculating on them. People try to argue that fact that the futures market drives up prices, but it absolutely drives up prices. Where do they get the money from? How does anybody make money in it? The money has to come from somewhere. And it comes to adding cost to those original resources. So that's what Norman Dodd was talking about. He was saying that the banks, the report that he says he rendered back to the people that sent him to investigate what went wrong. How did this crash? How did the U.S. economy completely collapse in 1929? And according to him, he says, there was not one sound bank in America. So the report that he rendered back to the people that sent him out to investigate was that we need to return to sound banking. Returning to sound banking meant to turn away from speculation, from encouraging and investing in speculation, which is what he said the banking system at that time did. In other words, they would finance a scam if it was going to make money in the short term. They wouldn't finance something because it was going to be a good long-term business. It was almost better in their mind to finance a quick scam than a long haul, legitimate business that would become the foundations of a sound economy that could support the nation, instead of a bunch of rise and fall companies. And each time at the tail end of each of those scams, somebody is driven into, eternal poverty. So at that time, he said he got what was the biggest shock of his life up until that time. And they let him know, Norm, and these were big wigs in the banking industry. They said, we'll never see sound banking in the United States again. He says, since the end of World War I. Now let the word World War I ring a bell. Just let the bells and whistles go off in your head. World War I. Since the end of World War I, we have been responsible for the institutionalization of whatever, for institutionalizing what they called conflicting interest. And they're so deeply entrenched, even by that time, in the 30s, since the end of World War I, which ended in 1917. So from 1917 to 1930, well, by that time would have been 32. These things had become so much a part of the American economy, laws, government's way of life, that there was nothing that could be done about them. And what's a conflict of interest? It is, let's say, a conflict of interest is someone who, remember when the Lord said there were thieves in the temple, that you made the Lord's house, the temple, a den of thieves and robbers. And how did they do that? By being the money changers. So what they did was they declared that they would have to approve of the people's sacrifices. And in order for the people to sacrifice, they had to have an approved and appropriate sacrifice. So what they would do, the people would bring their lamb that they wanted to sacrifice to the Lord. And according to their religion, it was mandatory that they meet in Jerusalem 3 times a year. And the Passover was one of them. So on the occasion of one of the Passovers, Jesus goes into the temple and he makes that cord and he beats the people. Not beats the people, but he uses the cord to drive out the money changers. He may have beat them. I don't know. He may have hit somebody good. Flipped over the table, flipped over their little exchange tables, their little banking center, and let all their animals loose. That must have been quite a sight. And if you think that's something, wait till about 1.5 years from now when he goes through here and tears this place up on his return. So anyway, what they would do is reject your sacrifice that you brought. No, that one has a blemish. One of his ears is longer than the other one. He's no good for sacrifice. Take that back. But you got to make a sacrifice. Here, we have some official, approved, certified lambs that are good for sacrifice. Buy one of these. Or we're going to sacrifice a pigeon. Okay, I have perfect pigeons. These are government approved, certified, temple approved, Sanhedrin recommended turtle doves. And you can get one of these for the low price of $19.99. All right, so this is a conflict of interest. The same people who are going to decide whether or not your sacrifice is good enough are the same people who are waiting there to sell you the sacrifice that is good enough if yours isn't good enough. So they have something to gain by turning down your sacrifices. This is a conflict of interest. If that were to be done, then the people who would decide whether your sacrifice is good or not need to be completely and totally independent, having nothing to do with the people who sell replacement sacrifices, and having nothing to gain whether your sacrifice is accepted or not. That is ethical, and there are no conflict of interest there. So there's many examples that you could give of conflicts of interest. So that's what he said. That our system, the banking system and everything, was riddled with conflicting interests, riddled with setups, was riddled with rip-offs. The deck had been stacked so bad that it couldn't be worked out. There was no getting rid of him. That's what they had said. That's what they said to him. And it deflated him. It deflated him so much because he was an honest man and idealistic. And he said he loved the country. He loved the idea of a place that was founded on freedom and the whole mythology that we used to hear about the country. Patriotism and all of that. He was a wholehearted believer in that. So hearing that the system is corrupt and there's nothing that can be done about it made him turn in his letter of resignation. He said he didn't want to work for an organization that is the rip-off place and knows it's a rip-off place. And they're making loans that aren't in the interest of the country, but just about making money. So what happened is what always happens when somebody discovers what's going on. Now, most people are happy to just make money. They don't know and they don't want to know if something bad and crooked was going on. I know a lady, her mother was, I don't know exactly what all the details were, but I don't know any of the details, but I know that her mother was a criminal and she embezzled from the corporation that she worked for. And the lady that I know, she's my age, around my age. She didn't know what her mother was doing, but she did know that there was no way that her mother's salary was supporting the lifestyle that her mother led. But that lifestyle also spilled over onto her. So she went along with it. So that's kind of the way most people are when they figure out that, something is not right with the way things are. When they realize that people are systematically cheated, and that's how the rich get rich and the poor get poorer, because it's a setup. It's done on purpose. Everything that they do is underhanded. They structure debt to make it difficult to pay back. They try their best to set you up, to make sure you will falter before you pay it all back, so they can take your interest that you paid them and get the property back, or get whatever collateral that you had. Just around every corner is somebody waiting to rip you off. There's a saying that says, behind every fortune, there's a great crime. Those people initially got rich by being crooks, and then they went legit. So Norman Dodd was the type of man that couldn't go along with this. He wanted to be in an honest business, so he tried to quit banking. Now, what they do when they find such a person, or when a person figures out what's going on and they start scratching their head, they'll buy this person off. They'll buy you off to come and, join the party. So he was offered a big cushy position to just go and sit in his office and keep his mouth shut. He said he couldn't do it. So he resigned. And this time he says his resignation stuck. And from that point on, so that would have been about 1933 or so. And he's a 34-year-old man. So from that point on, he found out he was blackballed in the banking industry. Said he could never get another job in banking again. So he did some investing. He sat on the stock exchange. He managed, capital funds, and was a financial advisor, things like that. So he then developed an interest in researching all these types of built-in conflicting interests. All of these ways that the system is internally corrupt. Ways that the whole system is a sham and a setup, and that people are they're believing in a myth. So in 1953, he found himself having been appointed the head of research for a congressional investigation committee that was investigating the tax-exempt foundations. We'd call them like not just 501c3, but these are huge foundations that had large amounts of money to give that were donated to them. Now, by donating to them, these people avoid taxes, and also they're not loaning money, they're giving away grants. And they are affecting change in the country through distributing huge amounts of money. And they're doing it tax-free. So it's like they're conducting business, but they're not paying any taxes. So these people were suspicious of these foundations and what they were up to. And they were also being accused of being involved in various anti-American activities, subverting the government, influencing the government, stuff like that. What we're doing now, like lobbyists, influencing elections. They were being accused of things like this. So there was enough interest of the American people that they pushed Congress to investigate this. So, these people by this time had a lot of power because these organizations have first taken off and gotten their start around 1900. So by that time, it had been 50 years that they were becoming entrenched. And even in the 30s, during the crash, their effects were already being felt to the point where those banking people told him, look, our way of life is riddled with people who are saying one thing and doing something else. There's nothing that can be done about it. Go collect your salary, play golf and tennis, and then you can retire one day. Just keep your mouth shut. So this is 20 years later, and he's appointed to this, it's called the Reese Commission on Tax-Exempt Foundations. So they enter into an investigation. And he, through a course of circumstances, he stumbles onto just a jackpot in having had one of the members of his staff get a 2-week access to the meeting minutes of the Carnegie Foundation from 1900 until that point, 1953. So he sends this member of his staff there, gives her the periods of time that he wants her to focus on, and she comes back with shocking revelations. So shocking that she actually had a nervous breakdown at finding out that nothing that she'd ever believed was true. Finding out that there were absolutely conspiracies within the United States. Finding out that, these are some of the things she found out, that World War I had actually been a scheme of the tax-exempt foundations. And that they had the stated goal of involving the United States in a war to alter life in the United States so that it could be comfortably merged with the Soviet Union. He had also been told this himself, by the president. I think his name was Rowan Gaither. During the investigation, he had gone to see Rowan Gaither at Rowan Gaither's invitation at the Ford Foundation in New York. And Rowan Gaither told him that they were operating under government mandates, government directives. And the government directives were that they were to pursue a course of action and use their grant-making power to set up, influence, do whatever so that America and Russia, or the Soviet Union at that time, would become indistinguishable. So that you could take a citizen out of Russia and a citizen out of the United States and drop one into the other and the other into the other. And these people would be comfortable. In other words, they wanted the American people, this was 1900, they wanted the American people, no, this is 1953, revealing what the purpose was in 1900. They wanted the people to think like communists. They wanted to get the American people to the point where they no longer thought in terms of democracy, where they no longer thought in terms of capitalism as being a good thing, free enterprise. They wanted them to see the founding of this country and the founders of this country not as having had admirable aims, or not as being people who wanted to establish freedom. And, basically freedom, capitalism, free enterprise, and all that stuff, overrated. It's better that we should think as global people, global citizens. They no longer wanted people to have allegiance to the United States, but they wanted them to think beyond borders, without borders, so that a person in the United States and a person in the Soviet Union would be indistinguishable. They would think the same way. So then they decided, how do we do that? We got to get control of the schools. And how do we get them in the war? No, first they wanted to change life so that it could be merged with the Soviet Union. How do we do that? And they decided that war, to get the United States involved in a war, that's the best way to change our lives, to force change. So then, after he said some time went by in the minutes. And then the next thing you know, a few years after they decided this was their goal, they said, well, how do we do it? We got to get control of the State Department. To get the United States in a war, we need to get control of the State Department. That's what they decided. So a few years later, you read further in the minutes, and they are involved in a war. So, World War I broke out in 1914. So eventually the United States was involved. And then he said he even found a correspondence where they were talking about having sent the President Wilson, Woodrow Wilson, a correspondence telling him to make sure that the war did not end too quickly. And as you know, Woodrow Wilson was the president that signed the Federal Reserve Act in 1913. Very sad. So they had the president in their pocket. They had the State Department. They wanted to get control of the State Department. They apparently had gotten control of the State Department. And by the end of World War I, that goal was accomplished. They had well on their way to their course of altering life in the United States, so it could be merged with the Soviet Union. And then remember what his bosses told him in the 30s, the banking bosses. Since the end of World War I, there are conflicting interests in the country. They're so deeply involved that they'll never be gotten rid of. So 1953, he's on this Reese committee and they find out all these things. So just when they're ready to render their report, let me fix something real quick. Just when they're ready to render their report, they start getting all this opposition. And eventually, the White House was used against them. Eventually, they even brought the White House to dissolve this commission, the Reese Commission, the Reese Committee, and to bury the report that they made. So the report was not, they weren't allowed to put their findings into the report. The hearings were disbanded and the committee was dissolved, and that was the end of it. All right. So the other thing that he discovered, besides the fact that they wanted to involve the United States in a war to change life, in order to do that, they wanted to get control of the State Department. Then after they had changed the life in the United States after the war, they decided, what do we do to make sure that life does not, that the people don't just return to the way they were before the war? Then they decided they needed to get control of education in the United States. Both of the universities and the underschools. They needed to take over the university. They needed to take over education in the United States. And they decided that the Rockefeller Foundation would handle domestic schools. Like high school, elementary, high school education. The Rockefeller Foundation would take care of that. And then anything that could be considered international, that the Carnegie Foundation would take care of that. So they set about to do that. Now, all right, let me read some quotes from Norman Dodd. He said to his bosses before they originally sent him out, there's something that you don't know about banking. And they after he investigated and he comes back and tells them that, then they say to him, since the end of World War I, conflicting interests are institutionalized and they are so prevalent that they will never be resolved. So banking and economies are characterized by speculative support. The banks were supporting speculation, which is terrible for your economy. Okay, so the banking is not based on sound banking. It's not realistic, and it also ignores evil. So they wanted to take over, the tax exempt institutions wanted to take over American education. So the reason why they wanted the country to be comfortably merged with Russia, the Soviet Union, was because Soviet Union at that time had just undergone a communist revolution. They were taken over by Marxist communists. Now, Marx was an economic, if you want to call him that, an economic theorist. And the reason why I say if you want to call him that is because his theory was so ridiculous. He might as well had written Alice in Wonderland. That's how fantasy-based his economic theories are. So his economic theory is called collectivism. The political theory is called communism. So each political system is going to have the corresponding economic system that goes with it. What goes with so-called democracy is free market capitalism. What goes with communism is something called, their economic system is called collectivism, which is socialism. And if you think about socialism, it is both a political system and an economic system. Those two, they go hand in hand. Socialism is a governmental system that is characterized by a collectivist economy where no one owns anything. And the words socialism and communism are really completely interchangeable. So he talked about that communism would be the perfected goal of socialism. So you're going to start with socialistic programs, and then those socialistic programs are eventually going to build up into the perfect communistic form. Okay. Now, what he said, the reason why rich people, elite people, bankers, and businessmen want this communism is because, this is what he said, to them, communism represents a means to developing what we call a monopoly. That is the organization, say, of large-scale industry. The organization of large-scale industry into an administrable unit. The implementation of communism, which we're going to say socialism because it's the same thing, and when we're more familiar with that term. People are willing to say they're socialists, but they're not willing to say that they're communist. When it's the same exact thing, and it never pretended that it wasn't. The same Karl Marx that talked about communism was the same one that put forth socialism. All right, so what he said was, for them, the reason why they want communism is because it represents a means to developing what they call a monopoly. Now, a monopoly is what China has in our stores today. Why are you buying cheap, overpriced junk? Because that's all that's in the store. Why are we buying stuff that's no longer made of any quality anymore? Why are you paying $200, $300, $400 for a vacuum cleaner made of plastic internal parts? I paid hundreds of dollars for a sewing machine back in 2015, I think, 15 or 16. And it has so much plastic on it. The sewing machine that I had back in like 1989, 1988 weighed 35 pounds. And it was made out of cast iron. And when I got rid of it, like 30 years later, it was still working great. And it cost $99. And I paid $900 for one in 2016 that was full of plastic. It would never last 30 years. One of those plastic levers is going to break straight off. It's got a bunch of little buttons on it. Beep, 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 beep. Instead of, metal knobs that can stand up to the wear and tear that you have to give on it. And then they have like a lot of soldered electrical connections inside there that are made so cheaply. A lot of the televisions that have those HDMI ports in the side, after just a couple of years of use, your HDMI ports are useless because of the cheap connections that are made and the bad soldering joints that are made in a TV. And people paid thousands and thousands of dollars for those flat screen televisions when they came out. Not knowing that, the children's toys that we used to make in the United States in the 70s were built better than, $3,000 appliances that we're buying today. A bicycle from the 70s is made better than a car now. You know why I can say that? Because you can run into the back of a car with a bicycle and do no damage to the bicycle and do $5,000 worth of damage to your plastic bumper on your car. Why do people put up with this? Because all the cars are like that. They have a monopoly. They have a monopoly. So by using the government, forming the very government itself to be in charge of the industrial, to be in charge of, what do you say, large-scale industry. They can deliver those industries over to the business people, and they will have monopolies. And it'll be just like, in your local Target, Best Buy, Walmart, Joann Fabric, wherever you shop, where there's nothing in there but garbage, overpriced garbage that you have to buy or go home with nothing. So when you get a monopoly and your products will be purchased whether they're good products or not. They'll be purchased whether they're the best price or not. I think it was the guy from Standard Oil. Was it Rockefeller? Who was that? He said competition, whoever it was, competition is a sin. Who said that? John D. Rockefeller. Standard Oil. He once professed competition is a sin. Nope. The lack of competition leads to people being able to say, take it or leave it. Have you noticed in the grocery store how bad the produce is now? I had gotten to where it's expensive. Now, this was some years ago when I had more money, where I only shopped at Whole Foods because I got tired of picking through the vegetables. Now, I only bought meat and vegetables there. I didn't go through there and buy their other natural soap and some goat's wool toothbrush or something. I don't know. But they sell a bunch of weird stuff in the middle aisles. I stayed out of there. I went straight to the meat department, and then I went around to the vegetables and got the heck out of there. And it was expensive, but it was worth it for me because everything in there was fresh. They had a guy or two or three or a girl walking around the produce department taking out the things that were getting overripe, arranging the displays, making sure that everything in there not just looked fresh but was fresh. Last time I went to the store, to buy onion. We were about to make something and didn't have any onion. So I ran up to the store. Man, I had to walk away from the onion pile because there was just a whole colony of fruit flies just breeding and having a whole civilization in the onions. And that's what happens when you have no competition. He said competition is a sin. It makes me alter the way I do business. I don't make as much money when I have competition. I have to be competitive. I have to actually give the people something they want to buy. All right, so that's what communism is going to do. If the state owns all the means of production and the business people are able to buy the state, if they're the real hidden controllers of the state, through the fact that these governments take loans, take bribes, which the loans usually amount to a bribe for the governments. They take all these loans with your name on it, and they get to take their administration fees and all the stuff that they get to do as government officials. And in return, they just deliver the economy over to people with lots of money. So it doesn't end up that the state owns all the means of production, which is the theory behind socialism, communism. So it ends up that the people who own the state own all the means of production. Thus, they have the monopoly. You remember the game Monopoly? The goal of the game really, I hate that game. We always used to play that game. It always seemed like we were going to have fun, but it never was fun. Never. Terrible game. You always left feeling kind of depressed. Because the whole point of the game is to own everything. And then to make the other players completely miserable and they can't land anywhere. Every place they land, pay up, pay up, pay up. That's how we are now. Up, driving too fast, 5 miles over the speed limit, pay up. It's your birthday. Time to get your car registration and a new driver's license, pay up. Oh, by the way, do you have insurance on your car? Pay up. Oh, good, you bought a house? Property tax. Used to be you got 65, you could claim property tax, free of property tax on your home. Not anymore. Pay up. Oh, you don't have it? Get out. Be like Jesus. He said, I don't have anywhere to lay my head. Foxes have holes, birds have nests, but I don't have anywhere to lay my head. And you know all the foxes and the birds are getting displaced too. But one thing you'll never do is charge a fox rent. All right. So, he said, the effect of the activities, Norman Dodd said this, the effect of the activities of the large endowed foundation over the past 40 years to orient our educational system over to and away from the support of the principles embodied in the Constitution, embodied in the Declaration of Independence and implemented in the Constitution, and educating them over to the idea that the task now was, as a result of the orientation of education away from these briefly stated principles and self-evident truths. You recognize that, how the Constitution says, we hold these truths to be self-evident. And that what had been the effect of the wealth which constituted the endowments of those foundations that had been in existence over the largest part over the largest portion of the span of 50 years, and holding them responsible for this change, investigating what was this change, and hold them responsible for these changes that they promoted and used these large sums of money to do it. He said, and we were able to bring forward, and what we were able to bring forward was that what we had uncovered was that the determination of these large endowed foundations through their trustees to actually get control over the content of American education. And then their efforts toward education were broken up into two spheres of responsibility. The Carnegie Foundation was going to be over foreign concerns with education. And the Ford Foundation was going to oversee domestic concerns. All right. So the Carnegie Endowment of International Peace, foreign things. World War I, they planned it. They wanted to alter life in America. And then remember, he found out in banking in about 1933 that since the end of World War I, these conflicting interests had embedded themselves in the country so deeply that they would never be resolved. All right. That's Norman Dodd. So, there's a guy. Some of you may have heard of him. His name was Quigley. Let me see. What was his first name? Quigley. All right. Carol Quigley. So Carol Quigley wrote a book, and it was called, what was the name of that book he wrote? Professor Quigley. Oh, Tragedy and Hope. Tragedy and Hope. So, what Carol Quigley talked about, Bill Clinton claims that Carol Quigley was one of his mentors. And Carol Quigley writes openly about this conspiracy, exactly as Norman Dodd laid it out. See if we can read some notes from it. It says, uncensored, Tragedy and Hope. The History of the World in Our Time by Carol Quigley is the ultimate insider admission of a secret global elite. This is on Amazon. A secret global elite that has impacted nearly every modern historical event. Learn how the Anglo-American banking elite were able to secretly establish and maintain their global power. This massive hardcover book of 1,348 pages provides a detailed world history beginning with the Industrial Revolution and imperialism through 2 world wars, a global depression, and the rise of communism. Now, Tragedy and Hope is the definitive work on the world's power structure and an essential source of material for understanding the history, goals, and actions of the New World Order. I'm going to see when he wrote this book. Now that's just the description of the book. He died in 1977. He wrote the book in 1966. And Bill Clinton, let's see, carolquigley.net, Professor Carol Quigley. Okay. It says the School of Foreign Service. It says, what do Bill Clinton and the military have in common? They both revere this guy, Carol Quigley. And then they're trying to like make it seem like, oh, spooky conspiracy theory stuff. Talking about they both revere the weird theories. You know what Norman Dodd said? And it continues to be true. The one thing that these people cannot hide is the fact that the effects that we see in the world all bear out the fact that these things are true. If these things were a conspiracy theory, if none of this was true, then how are we accidentally bumbling into exactly what would be happening if these things were true? Why do we now have a global government? If in 1966 this were some weird theory. Okay, if McCarthy was just harassing people, then how come the young people think communism is a good idea? Because the schools have been taken over by people who are teaching them to think communistically so that the country can be comfortably merged with the Soviet Union. Okay. Now, it says during his second semester now this is a website that is speaking against this guy. And they're going to still make our point. During his second semester at Georgetown University, Bill Clinton did a bold thing. He skipped classes. More to the point, he missed 4 sessions of Development of Civilization, a year-long course for students entering the School of Foreign Service taught by Professor Quigley. Quigley was something of a legend. Listen, it says, for students entering the School of Foreign Service. What did they say they had to do in order to involve the United States in a war, in order to control the actions of the U.S. government? They said we have to get control of the State Department. That was the goal of the foundations. It says Quigley was something of a legend, and not just at the university. He lectured at the Brookings Institute and the Industrial College of the Armed Forces. He wrote for the Washington Post and the Star and the now defunct DC Daily newspaper. And the talks he gave at the State Department on Africa and France were worked up into articles for the magazine Current History, where Quigley served on the editorial board. He was a consultant to the House Committee on Astronautics and Space Exploration and had some connection with the birth of NASA. So we all know that another conspiracy, another conspiracy, not a conspiracy theory, but another conspiracy was to convince the American people and the people of the world that we could and did go to the moon in the 1960s. Didn't happen. Okay. Okay. So let's see what Bill Clinton has to say about it. Says Bill Clinton, it seems, mastered basic Quigleyism in rapid order. Friends recall that he would stay behind after class with a clutch of students who threw questions at the professor. The scores in the professor's grade book for the 1964-1965 school year, preserved like the rest of Quigley's papers at the Georgetown University Library, form a row of figures hovering steadily in the B range for Clinton, save for a solitary and conspicuous D. Probably from a test early that semester designed to concentrate students' attention through pain and fear. Okay. It says, Bill Clinton himself often recalls the professor in his speeches. And you know Bill Clinton does not write his speeches. Why are they bringing up Quigley? It says, Quigley died in the first days of 1977, too soon to see his former student elected to office. Clinton mentioned him in his first inaugural speech as governor of Arkansas. He spoke of Quigley at Georgetown University in 1991 while launching his presidential bid. And so it should have been of little surprise that in accepting the presidential nomination at the Democratic National Convention in 1992, Clinton once again invoked the professor. As a teenager, I heard John Kennedy's summons to citizenship. And then, as a student at Georgetown, I heard that call clarified by a professor I had named Carol Quigley, who said that America was the greatest nation in history because our people have always believed in two great ideas, that tomorrow can be better than today, and that each of us has a personal moral responsibility to make it so. That sounds great. Then it goes on to say, the book that Clinton alludes to most often is Quigley's methodological work, The Evolution of Civilizations. No doubt essential reading for anyone hoping to get a B. Mockery. And the president specifically praises the author for his clarity and aptness of expression. But during the very first year that Bill Clinton was his student, Carroll Quigley was finishing a book that he had written for years. The book was the magnum opus Quigley expected would establish him as a major historian and a formidable thinker outside the classroom and beyond the Beltway. And when it was finally published in 1966, readers discovered that Quigley had written the history of the 20th century, of the 1900s. Tragedy and Hope was enormous. It weighed 8 pounds. It was more than 500,000 words long and filled 1,300 pages plus index. It combined elements of Quigley's wide reading in economics, political science, psychology, and anthropology to create a general analysis of human development in nearly every corner of the world. Even the harshest reviews noted how ambitious and interesting the book was, though none could wish it longer. During Clinton's senior year, Quigley published an abridged version for classroom use. None of this would be worth more than a footnote if it were not for the curious trajectory Quigley's published work subsequently took. By 1972, Tragedy and Hope had excited conversation in regions far to the right of President Nixon. And there were echoes of that excitement even in corners of the left. Quigley started receiving letters and phone calls demanding answers to questions about the Council on Foreign Relations and the banking system. And after his death, long after that book had gone out of print, entrepreneurial-minded ideologues were selling bootleg copies of his masterpiece. One of these vendors was Robert Bolivar Lepew, or whatever, leader of the Minutemen, a forerunner of today's angry militia movement. All right. So they're giving the facts. They're giving some facts, but they're spinning it with mocking and really trying to set the stage for calling all the things that Quigley revealed as conspiracy theories. Yet here we are decades and decades and decades later, up to our eyeballs in all the things that his book would predict. You know, some people are paid to speak against these things and they know that they're true. Some people just can't get their mind around it. But anybody who would take and write anything this long, they know that this is true. All right. So Bill Clinton, President of the United States, mentions Quigley. There's a video on YouTube of him mentioning Quigley. See if we can. Maybe find it. Oh boy. Well, anyway. Yep, says Bill Clinton speaks of Carol Quigley, 1992.
As a teenager, I heard John Kennedy's summons to citizenship. And then as a student at Georgetown, I heard that call clarified by a professor named Carol Quigley, who said to us that America was the greatest nation in history because our people had always believed in two things: that tomorrow can be better than today, and that every one of us has a personal, moral responsibility to make it so.
Now, hopefully you don't think that Bill Clinton wrote that speech. And that, he's a Democrat. He's a Democrat. And one of the things that Carol Quigley talked about in Tragedy and Hope is the fact that now he just took all the fur and the skin and the fat and the muscle and, you know, the nerves and everything else and broke this down to the bare bones and said that one of the things that is necessary to have happen, and that does happen, is that the political parties need to be virtually the same. And that so each time when the people get tired of the direction that you're headed, they'll blame it on the party that's in power. Oh, we got to switch to the Republicans. Maybe they can fix the stuff that the Democrats are doing. But then when the Republicans get in office, you know, the train is still headed in the same direction. That there's no difference between the political parties, but it does give the chance for the people to release that steam and to have the feeling that they're voting the rascals out. That's what he said. That's what people thought they were doing with Donald Trump. We're going to vote the rascals out. The problem was, you know, Obama and Hillary Clinton. Isn't that ironic? But as you can see, we're deeper into world government than we ever were. All these conspiracies continue to just steamroll right ahead, and it doesn't matter who's in power. So-called in power. So, Carol Quigley. Going to maybe read his biography. Okay, Carol Quigley. This is going to be straight off at Wikipedia. We're not going on anything controversial. Okay, born in Boston, Quigley attended Harvard University, where he studied history and earned a BA, MA, and PhD degrees. He taught at Princeton. Now, this is supposed to be some wild conspiracy theorist. Or was he? And he studied extensively. Even as that mocker on that website that we just went off of claimed. He studied economics, anthropology, philosophy, all that, and made a history of the 19th century. An epic history of the 19th century, concluding that there was a conspiracy. Yet, this man taught at Princeton University, then at Harvard, and then from 1941 to 1976, 1 year before he died, at the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. This is a quack. Remember? Okay. From 1941 until 1972, he taught a 2-semester course at Georgetown on the development of civilizations. According to his obituary in the Washington Star, many alumni of Georgetown's School of Foreign Service asserted that this was the most influential course in their undergraduate career. The development of civilizations. So this man, he hit the nail on the head. And guess what? He wasn't against it. He wasn't exposing it. He liked it. He said the only problem he had with it is, why are they keeping it a secret? He said they ought to come out with it. I'm looking at the dog. This is this quack now. They're trying to say he's a quack because he exposed it all. In addition to his academic work, Quigley served as a consultant to the U.S. Department of Defense, the United States Navy, the Smithsonian Institution, and the House Select Committee on Astronautics and Space Exploration. Okay. In this Wikipedia thing, it talks about his influence on Bill Clinton. Most of the stuff that we already read. 1991, Clinton named Quigley as an important influence in his aspirations and political philosophy. When Clinton launched his presidential campaign in a speech at Georgetown, he mentioned Quigley again. And during his acceptance speech to the 1992 Democratic National Convention, we just listened to that. All right. All right, Quigley's claim. See, they like to call it claim. This book, in his book, The Anglo-American Establishment, From Rhodes to Cliveden, written in 1949 and published posthumously in 1981. So that means he wrote it but never had it published in his lifetime. Quigley purports to trace the history. See, they using words like purports to take away the credibility. But Quigley said in his book that he's traced the history of a secret society roundtable group founded in 1891 by Cecil Rhodes and Alfred Milner. Quigley notes that the organization was so modified and so expanded by Milner after the eclipse of Stead in 1899, and especially after the death of Rhodes in 1902, that it took on quite a different organizational character, although it continued to pursue the same goals. The society consisted of an inner circle, the Society of the Elect, and an outer circle, the Association of Helpers, known as the Milner Kindergarten and the Round Table Group. The society as a whole does not have a fixed name. The society has been known at various times as Milner's Kindergarten, as the Round Table Group, this is a quote from the book, and as the Rhodes Crowd. as the Times crowd. And you remember me mentioning Cecil Rhodes. Bill Clinton was a Rhodes Scholar. So, which means he received a scholarship from this Rhodes Foundation to be brought into these purposes. All right. All Souls Group. All right. I have chosen to call it the Milner Group. Those persons who have used the other terms or heard them used have not generally been aware that all these various terms refer to the same group. This group is, as I shall show, one of the most important historical facts of the 20th century, a secret society. Quigley assigns this group primarily or exclusive credit for several historic events: the Jameson Raid, the Second Boer War, the foundation of the Union of South Africa, the replacement of the British Empire with the Commonwealth of Nations, and a number of Britain's foreign policy decisions in the 20th century. So he's saying that this secret society controlled the world to the extent that it was able to directly influence all these things. It says the Commonwealth of Nations, generally known simply as the Commonwealth, is a political association of 53 member states, nearly all of them former territories of the British Empire. The chief institution of the organizations are the Commonwealth Secretariat, which focuses on that's all that says. I don't want to. Radical right. Quigley assigns this group primary or exclusive credit. Okay, we already read that. According to Quigley, the leaders of this group were Cecil Rhodes and Alfred Milner from 1891 until Rhodes' death in 1902. Milner alone until his death in 1925, Lionel Curtis from 1925 to 1955, Robert H. Brand from 1955 to 1963, and Adam D. Morris from 1963 until the time Quigley wrote the book. This organization also functioned through certain loosely affiliated front groups, including the Royal Institute of International Affairs and the Institute of Pacific Relations and the Council on Foreign Relations. In addition, other secret societies are briefly discussed in Tragedy and Hope, including a consortium of leaders of the central bankers of several countries who formed the Bank for International Settlements. Okay. All right. So, at the same time that this man was altogether an insider, they want to say that he was for this, he loved this, he talked about this. Now they want to distance themselves from this. All right. But there's no denying it. So what I went to his okay, this is where he went. This is where he ended his career from 1941 until the end of his career. He was at Georgetown University, the School of Foreign Service. He was a professor. That's where Bill Clinton had him at. So what does he do? Foreign service. He teaches diplomats. So if you hover over the School of Foreign Service, it says the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service, known simply as the School of Foreign Service, or SFS, is a school of international relations at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. It is considered to be one of the world's leading international affairs schools. Granting degrees at both undergraduate and graduate levels. Notable alumni include U.S. President Bill Clinton, former CIA Director George Tenet, and King Felipe VI of Spain, as well as heads of states or governors of many countries. Its faculty has also included many distinguished figures in international affairs, such as former U.S. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, former U.S. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel, and former President of Poland Alexander Nowinski, something like that. All right. Now, I actually looked on their website, and the list of former students, of alumni from that place, is way longer and far more illustrious than just these people that it names here. All right. The school has evolved from its original emphasis on diplomacy and law to become a center for research and teaching on global affairs. It's founded by Edmund A. Walsh. So, Father Edmund Aloysius Walsh was an American Jesuit Catholic priest. He founded this school. He founded this foreign policy school in Georgetown, inside the School of Georgetown. Okay, so he's a Jesuit Catholic priest, author, professor of geopolitics, and founder of the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, which he founded in 1919, 6 years before the U.S. Foreign Service itself existed. All right, now, this is what the reason why I read that and why I was kind of fixated on that. Let me tell you. About a couple weeks ago, I was sleeping like I do, and I heard this. I want you to pay attention to this stuff, because you know what? If I doubt God, I'm just a fool. I'd just be a total fool. Because y'all know that I do not watch the news. I wouldn't have any way of knowing about these pinpoint things unless God was bringing them to my attention. Okay. This is what I heard. All right, well, maybe it was in here. Maybe it was in here. See, because I couldn't make these things up, guys. I couldn't. There's no way I would or could make these things up. Okay. On October 19th of this year, 2019, October 19th, 2019, I was waking up and I heard this audibly. Kelly McFarland, Obama's friend. Kelly McFarland, Obama's friend. So I got my pencil and I wrote it down right there. And I said, okay, fine. I wrote it down. So probably later on that day, or maybe a day later or so, I decided to look up who is Kelly McFarland, Obama's friend. So I just put in Kelly McFarland and Obama. So, surprise, surprise, who is Kelly McFarland, guys? Who is Kelly McFarland? Well, let me tell you who he is. Kelly McFarland. He is Dr. Kelly M. McFarland. He is the Director of Programs and Research. As Director of Programs and Research, Dr. Kelly McFarland manages ISD's Carnegie Corporation funded. Remember, Carnegie was going to take over the part of education that had to do with things that were foreign. Okay, so Kelly M. McFarland is Director of Programs and Research. As Director of Programs and Research, Dr. Kelly McFarland manages ISD's Carnegie Corporation funded project to expand and improve ISD's diplomacy, case studies library, and online research for academics and students around the world in the study of real-world diplomatic issues and practices. He also leads ISD's policy and research agenda to include a series of scholar practitioner working groups that explore emerging global policy challenges and make viable recommendations to policymakers. Dr. McFarland also teaches both undergraduate and graduate courses at the Edmund Walsh School of Foreign Service. Remember who Edwin Walsh was that I just read about? The guy who founded the school that Professor Quigley taught at? Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., in the School of Foreign Service. Okay. Dr. McFarland comes to ISD, which ISD stands for the Institute for the Study of Diplomacy. So what did they need to do? What was their other thing? Take over education and get control of the State Department. State Department handles foreign affairs. That's how they were going to get them involved in a war. Because you don't go to war in your own country, you go to war with other countries. I think the dog has to use the bathroom. Okay. Okay, Dr. McFarland comes to ISD, the Institute for the Study of Diplomacy, after serving with the Department of State since 2009 in the Office of the Historian. After serving with the Department of State, the State Department, the U.S. State Department, since 2009, who became president in 2009? You guessed it, Obama. Okay, so he served in the office of historian, where he compiled and edited the recently published Foreign Relations of the United States volume on Middle East regional issues during the Carter administration, and as an Arabian Peninsula analyst in the department. Not that he served in the Carter administration, but he published a history of foreign relations of the United States on the Middle East region during the Carter administration. He studied the Carter administration. Okay, and as an Arabian Peninsula analyst in the department's Bureau of Investigation and Research, INR, and in the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs. In November 2015, Kelly completed a one-year tour for the Office of the Director of National Intelligence as the Presidential Daily Briefing Book Briefer for State Department senior officials. Let me read that again. In November 2015, who was president? Kelly completed a one-year tour for the Office of the Director of National Intelligence as the Presidential Daily Briefing Book Briefer for State Department senior officials. Dr. McFarland holds a BA in history, a MA, and a PhD, specializing in U.S. diplomatic history. Okay. So, Kelly McFarland, professor in the International Studies Department at Georgetown University. He teaches at the same school, in the same department as Carol Quigley. All right. Now, to tie Norman Dodd in here again. Norman Dodd said they wanted to get control of education so that they could make sure that the world didn't change back after the changes they made from being able to create that upside downness from the war. This Kelly McFarland, Obama's friend, was appointed to the State Department in 2009, the year Obama became president. And what do they want to do? Control the government. They said we have to get control of the State Department. What does the State Department do? They deal with foreign affairs. They deal with other countries, other states. What is the goal? To get all the states together. Globalism. All right, look what Georgetown University is up to. There's an initiative at the Georgetown University. It's called, this is straight off their website, the Georgetown Global Cities Initiative. Global cities. Cities are in countries. Cities are only global cities if you have a global government. It says the Georgetown Global Cities Initiative. They wanted to use the schools to take over the thinking of the people, to get them to think like communists, to get them in one country, not to be loyal to a country, but to be just another citizen of the world. Forget your country. Why? So they can get it all together. Why? So they can have a monopoly. Why? So they can control the world. They need to get it into, as Norman Dodd said, an administrable unit. So the Georgetown Global City Initiative reaches across the entire university community to explore cross-cutting themes related to urbanization. Through this dialogue, Georgetown aims to align more than 60 faculty scholars and practitioners engaged in urban research who are not otherwise linked through their traditional academic discipline. The initiative matches Georgetown's international research network with our civic role as a leading local anchor institution in Washington, D.C. Research themes include social equity. Are you starting to recognize these nonsense words that have been crammed down our throat in the last 10 years? Social equity? How are you going to achieve social equity unless you control how people think? And who's going to decide what's equal? Maybe I don't want to think like you think. Rapid urbanization, city diplomacy. Now, all these are code words for something sinister, but they sound real good. I can tell you what city diplomacy means. It means when you're implementing things in your city that should not be happening, but you got to do it diplomatically, so to quiet down the people when they rise up against it. For instance, some of the things, if you look on Grindall, I'll leave a link to his channel in the description box, Grindall 61. He lives in California. I think he lives in like West Covina or somewhere like that. And they are Agenda 21ing those people to death. And when the people object to the things that are going on, this is how you get by with it anyway. You have to have city diplomacy. In other words, these are the tactics that we're going to use to cram these things down the people's throat, whether they want them or not. City diplomacy? This nonsense, meaningless word. Urban governance frameworks. Social entrepreneurship. Now that word got me. Social entrepreneurship. So do you see how these words, they don't say anything? They don't mean anything. So they could be any agenda, but they're not. Just looking at the word, you can't tell what it is. And it sounds like it could be okay, social entrepreneurship. But then you're thinking social entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship has got to do with running a business. So what is social entrepreneurship? What are you, a friendly business? What are you, a business on Facebook? You social media business? What is social entrepreneurship? So I looked up what social entrepreneurship is. And of course, it is one of these New World Order, socialistic type, communist, collectivist ideas. One of the other things that Norman Dodd said in one of the interviews was that they were trying to convince the people, convince the country that the future of the world and America belongs to collectivism. They wanted to make that idea, that notion popular. That, the the latest and greatest. They say, oh, everything is tech. Tech, 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 tech. Oh, .com. Cryptocurrencies. This is the next big thing. So the next big thing they're trying to convince us is, or they were at that time, was collectivism. Oh, that rest of that, oh, that's dead. Oh, nobody's wearing an afro anymore. You gotta get braids. Nobody's wearing an afro anymore. That kind of thing. Don't think about it. It's just fashionable. We're just going along with the next thing that we're doing. So I had to look up what is social entrepreneurship, because that's one of those words that, first of all, it's not saying anything, and secondly, it could mean anything, and it could be hiding, like euthanasia. Oh, cute little word. But what it means is killing people. Putting people out of their misery. Okay, you could also have family planning. Code for abortion. And that's what all these words are. City diplomacy. That's a word, they've defined it among themselves. They know what it means. Holding all these meetings and dealing with the uproar of the people from all these crazy changes that are being made to handle them, to handle the people, while at the same time not responding to anything that they want you to do. So social entrepreneurship, I had to look it up. So you already know that it was founded by a Jesuit during the time that the foundations were working. And you know that Kelly McFarland, the one I dreamed about, he is the manager of a program that is funded by the Carnegie Foundation. These very foundations that Norman Dodd was talking about. He specifically mentioned this foundation by name. That their goal was to control the world through education. And specifically the Carnegie Foundation was to control foreign matters. And the name of this school is the Walsh School for the exact name. The Edmund Walsh School of Foreign Service. Okay, founded by a Jesuit priest. In the same period of time that we're talking about. Between 1900 and 1950, what really they considered their work done, according to Norman Dodd, he was told that they considered their work done with the successful formation of the United Nations. That was their goal, because the United Nations is the global government. See, they tried for it after World War I with the League of Nations. People weren't ready. They couldn't get it over. So social entrepreneurship. Another one of those little dangerous little made up words. So social entrepreneurship. This is what I found. This thing gets way better. I'll probably have to make a part 2, because this is just unreal how deep this goes. All right, I'm looking for this article that I pulled up to tell me What in the world is social entrepreneurship? What kind of nonsense? Okay, here we go. This is Stanford Social Innovation Review, informing and inspiring leaders of social change. Now you know that's got every element of the New World Order written all over it. Now, too, as they say to the uninitiated, those just sound like innocent little things. But you got to admit, you hear those words a little bit too much now. Social, equity, change, global. All right. Social entrepreneurship, the case for definition. Social entrepreneurship is attracting growing amounts of talent, money, and attention. But along with its increasing popularity has come less certainty about what exactly a social entrepreneur is and does. Just like I said, what is this meaningless thing? But don't get too concerned, because this guy doesn't have a problem with it. Okay. In the nascent field of social entrepreneurship is growing rapidly and attracting increased attention from many sectors. The term itself shows up frequently in the media, is referred to by public officials, has become common on university campuses, and informs the strategy of several prominent social sector organizations, including Ashkoa and the Schwab and the Skoll foundations. So there's just this undefined, crazy thing that they're pushing, telling us it's all such a great idea. Nobody really knows what it is. And everybody's just like, yeah, it sounds good. Okay, the reason behind the popularity of social entrepreneurship are many. On the most basic level, there is something inherently interesting and appealing about the entrepreneurs and the stories of why and how they do what they do. People are attracted to social entrepreneurs. Still, we don't know what the heck it is. What the heck is a social entrepreneur? So if I can talk and socialize with people and I'm an entrepreneur, am I a social entrepreneur? Okay. So they're going to say, one example of one is last year's Nobel Peace Prize laureate Mohammed Yunus, for many of the same reasons that they find business entrepreneurs like Steve Jobs so compelling. Now, this article is from 2007. These extraordinary people come up with brilliant ideas and against all the odds exceed at creating new products and services that dramatically improve people's lives. Got to watch out for all that emotion. Okay, emotion is fine because people can genuinely get emotional about things. But set all the emotion aside and find where's the substance. So many people start out in an emotional. They get swept away in something emotional. There never was any substance to what they were swept up in believing in. They didn't take time to understand it, make sure it made sense. Is it real? Am I just being had? Nothing. It just sounds good and feels good. Let's do it. And I'm like, yeah, after you calm down, now, yeah, still tell me what you're talking about. We're not going to do it because you're coming in here crying. Because you could be crying, you could be just as upset as you want to be and wrong. And you could be just as excited as a lark. And what you want to do is nonsense. Okay. But the interest in social entrepreneurship transcends the phenomenon of popularity and fascination with people. So, okay, that's what a social entrepreneur is. Maybe now we're getting somewhere. They're a phenomenon and they're popular. Bernie Madoff was popular and he was a phenomenon. He was also a crook. Okay, so this is a charismatic person. Okay, charismatic person. Now, a charismatic person has absolutely nothing to do with whether they're carrying you off into something good or bad. It's just a characteristic that some people possess. Now, they still can be good or evil and charismatic. But a lot of times people stop at all that charisma and they just like what a person has to say. And that's how con men get away with what they do. And that's what communism is. It's a great big con. It's a lie. And people have not stopped to think about that. They have not stopped to think about how communism doesn't make any sense. They haven't stopped to think about how if you turn over all your power to this all-powerful state that gets to outlaw certain thoughts, feelings, thinkings, religions, that these people are just human beings and they're evil too. No good people exist. No people who are inherently good within themselves exist. People who are righteous because they obey God, because they deny what they're thinking and feeling inside and go with what God said. I feel like slapping the taste out of your mouth, but God told me to turn the other cheek. There's my righteousness. And I can be righteous and still feel like slapping the taste out of your mouth. Because my righteousness isn't defined in Christ. It's defined in God. He counts me righteous because I obeyed him. Even though on the inside, I'm still the same old person. I'm still in this same flesh that I have to fight, and be a new creature in my spirit. But these, like I always like to say, these fairy tale believing, unicorn riding, kumbaya, hold hands, embrace everything. Nothing's good or bad, it's just different. That's a lie. They just believe that just anything is possible. Now, with God, all things are possible, but God has already defined his will. So it's not just anything. He's already defined things that are not possible. It's not possible for him to lie. He said nobody's good, so nobody's good. He said human government is impossible because the king is going to turn on you. And communism is absolutely no different. Once you turn over all your power to them, they are going to be a tyrant, just like the last people that you threw the rascals out. And you find yourself still on the same crash course with disaster. Election after election after election. You're poorer and poorer and poorer. Okay. Now. So they're saying that social entrepreneurs go beyond just having charisma. Okay, that's the start. They have charisma. Social entrepreneurship signals the imperative to drive social change. Now, it doesn't have to make any business sense. And it is that potential payoff with its lasting transformational benefit to society that sets the field and is its practitioners apart. That sets the field and its practitioners apart. Okay. So, charismatic, and I want to change society. Okay. Although the potential benefits offered by social entrepreneurship are clear to many of those promoting and funding these activities, so someone's funding this. The actual definition of what social entrepreneurs do to promote these sorts of magnitude returns is less clear. Even these people who are for it, saying, what the heck is it? In fact, we would argue that the definition of social entrepreneurship today is anything but clear. So here, everybody, it's the same thing. Everybody around here promoting all these buzzwords and all this stuff that they have never thought out. They haven't thought it out. They have not thought it out. If you make the Bible illegal, they haven't thought it out. If you make it illegal for counselors to counsel children who don't want to have same-sex attraction. Some boy who wandered onto some pornographic site and got fixated with perverted things and wants help trying to forget that stuff. Nope, can't talk to him about that. Can't pray for him. Can't tell him what God said. So you actually want to put into law. You actually want to outlaw someone's religion. You actually want to outlaw the religion that the country was based upon. And that 90% of us held just 30, 40 years ago. That's really what you want to do. You have no idea what you're going to replace it with, or how that's going to work, or can that work? What happens to societies? Well, let's just push this button and see what happens. What happens to societies when they unhinge themselves? You have no clue. But everybody's doing it. And it's popular. And it's a phenomenon. And it's fascinating. That's the words this man used. And he's for this thing. Social entrepreneurship is an appealing construct precisely because it holds such high promise. It holds high promise. They just want you to just catch this cloud and just believe. I believe my unicorn is going to lay a golden egg. I believe communism can work. No other form of government has ever worked because man is fallen. And this one won't work either. The Bible is true, whether you like it or not. The world is corrupt. Man is corrupt. A little over 4,000 years ago, God killed everybody and everything except for 8 people and animals that were saved on the ark, and the marine animals and birds that were able to fly. I guess maybe all the birds were on the ark. So, and he said he was going to do it again. He's going to have to do it again. Because again, man has reached a point where all of his imaginations are continually evil. Are always and continuously evil. And therefore evil happens. Because it's in his heart. It's in his heart. And until we turn our will over to God, you are this evil. And I realize this thing lives in my flesh. I get angry. And like I said, I might want to just really tell somebody off. But I got to obey God. and walk away. And over the years, I have learned, oh, that's truly the best way to handle it. It's truly the best way to just deliver yourself from trouble. Because you go here, they're going to go here, it's going to go here, 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 and you'll never bring it back down again. The Bible talks about trouble and avoiding trouble, because the consequence of not avoiding trouble is like a man that's trying to cut off his stream of urine once he started it. Nearly impossible. All right, so I read a whole bunch of that article to you. And as you can see, what is social entrepreneurism? Nonsense. Just like the rest of this stuff these people are believing in. All this so-called change is nothing but a smoke screen. It's nothing but a false hope. It's nothing but Candy Mountain. Come on over to Candy Mountain. And then when you get over to Candy Mountain, the cannibals are waiting for you and they're going to eat you. Oh, it's a great place, yeah. There's some kind of song talking about Candy Mountain. Or, remember, consummate Satanist known as Sammy Davis Jr., who, as you know, converted to Judaism. He converted and became a Jew. And he also posed with the leader of the Church of Satan, Antoine LaVey. He posed with him, big smile on his face. He sang a song, said the Candyman can. And that's who you believe. That's who you believe when you believe in your social dictators, your socialist dictators, your antichrist that they will elect. That somehow all men are evil, but not this one. We can put all our faith and trust. Guys, let me tell you something. I hope this sobers somebody up. I'm not going to do it, but there's a room in this house where there's a shelf. And there's some other places too, but there's a shelf dedicated to Barack Obama. And I've told this person over and over again who Obama was. And you know what? I heard her talking to one of her best friends on a speaker about a month ago. And I could have just died right at that moment. And I would have welcomed death. I would have welcomed death at that moment if I could have just left this world, because all hope of anything positive in this world, on this globe, aside from being caught up to meet the Lord in the air, left me at that moment. Maybe the other hope I have is to say something that will cause somebody to take faith in Jesus. But other than that, everything that I ever knew left me right at that moment. And I'm not kidding. This lady actually said they were talking about the times. Talking about, protests and war and what they're watching on the news every day. Oh, it's such a mess. This is what she said. Oh, I wish Obama would come back and save us from this mess. Something in me died right then. When she said that, something in me got up and left out of me. And it was hope. About a week before that, another girl, this girl was about 21, 22, She said, "Oh, why can't I find a good man? Oh, just looking for a good guy." Now, this happened to be a Caucasian girl who only dates black guys. She says, "Oh, I just want him to have the looks of," I'm just going to make up some guy because I can't remember who she said. "If he could have the looks of Malik Yoba and the heart of a Barack Obama." I just was like, what is the use? What is the use? Why don't I just die already? What good am I doing here? If it was just left up to the people that I'm surrounded with, I might as well just go on to heaven. Except for the hope that I might, through a video, reach somebody. There would be nothing for me to even be still walking around here breathing all this filthy air for. And then maybe after this is all cut off and if we're running around through the woods, I might meet some lovely souls that love the Lord. And I would delight myself in him and them. That would be worth it. But being around here with, it's just unbelievable. There's Obama shrines in this house that I'm in. They're trying to make the Trump presidency so ridiculous that Obama looks like he did a good job. People want him back. And if people are ready to believe in social entrepreneurism, that it takes some guy from Stanford to write an article, and I'm like, as long as I'll get out, it's like a little book, and it takes all that, and we still don't know what it is. Let's see, there's some comments down here. It's ridiculous. And people are like, yes, it's so beautiful. We're all going to come together as one. We're going to drop all our differences. And then you're going to get somewhere and then you're going to find out, oh, there is a difference between a lion and a lamb. Maybe it's not such a good idea to have a chimpanzee as a pet because he will bite your friend's face off. That happened. So here these people I'm looking in the comments now, all these people agree. They don't know what the heck this thing is, but boy, it sure sounds good. That's enough of that. It's hard for me to listen to this nonsense. I got so many tabs open, my computer is just ridiculously slow. Okay. Trying to think, should I go to a part 2? All right. Now, this will be a part 2. There will be a part 2. That's going to start with another dream. And take this off into yet another direction. But still staying at the same place. But just another side of the same coin. just another way to clarify it and make it more clear. I was sorry, I was looking at the leaves blowing around outside. Okay, so, almost forgot. This is an article by our friend Kelly McFarland. Oh, this is going to be the perfect segue into the next part. Lord, I love you so much. I thank you for all the things that you're showing me, even though they're no fun. But it's good to know what's going on. And I did ask. All right. So our friend Kelly McFarland and Ben Armbruster, article published November 15th, 2018. Well, where did he publish it at? Let's see. A newsletter called, or whatever this is, The Globe Post. The Globe. The Globe. New World Order. This is all about global government, which we are already under. We're already under global government. All right. So the Globe Post. All right, here we go. It's by Mr. Kelly McFarland. Now remember, he's Obama's friend. That's what I was told. That's all I was told. Kelly McFarland, Obama's friend. And I heard that clear as a bell. And I wrote it down. So here's his article. One of the most consequential national security decisions of Donald J. Trump's presidency passed by quietly last week as much of the media attention in the United States was focused on the midterm elections. On November 5th, the U.S. unilaterally reimposed oil and banking sanctions on Iran that were lifted as a part of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. As the Iran nuclear deal is formally known, okay. So Donald Trump imposed some sanctions, said he unilaterally, that's always a bad word, unilaterally reimposed oil and banking sanctions. See, you're going to find the whole world boils down to oil and banking. Oil and banking. That were lifted as a part of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action as the Iran nuclear deal is formally known. Trump claims he withdrew from the 2015 accord with the intention of turning up the heat on Iran to get a better deal. Others argue, rightly in our view, that the Trump administration's ultimate goal is actually regime change. But regardless of whether Trump is gunning for a better deal or regime change, reimposing these sanctions has no tactical or strategic value and will only serve to isolate the United States, weaken our national security, and embolden Americans' adversaries, including Iran. Aside from the fact that reimposing these sanctions puts the U.S. in material breach of the JCPOA, perhaps the biggest flaw in Trump's plan is that our allies and partners in the deal, the European Union, that's the seat of global government. That's the real power behind behind the UN. The UN itself is not the power. The European Union is. So the UN is going to be puppets of the European Union in the same way that it's been puppets all this years of the United States, which is the puppet of the state of Israel. Okay. So in our partners in the deal, the European Union, China, and Russia. Since when did communist China and communist Russia become our partners? Oh, I forgot. Since we had the nation reoriented such that we could be comfortably merged with the Soviet Union. I forgot. So it's comfortable now. It's comfortable now. We're merged. We're merged. International cooperation. This is by our friend Kelly McFarland. This is what he says. Come on, get ready, get ready, get ready. Former President Barack Obama's sanctions. Wait a minute. Former President Barack Obama's sanctions regime on Iran. No, I think he flip-flopped that word. Former President Barack Obama's sanctions on Iran was so successful. I think that's like a little typo. I'm not sure. That doesn't make sense. But the Obama regime's sanctions on Iran were so successful because Obama was able to wrangle the international cooperation needed to dramatically reduce Iran's oil exports. Back then, the EU, China, Russia, and other large oil importing nations like India and South Korea all agreed that Iran's nuclear program had to be reined in, and that cutting back on buying Iranian oil was the first step towards doing that. The Trump administration has nowhere near this level of cooperation, and thus it's at best unclear whether Iran will feel a similar economic squeeze. What's more, Trump's sanctions have the added effect of benefiting Russia. I thought they were our friends. I thought you just said that they were our allies and partners. The European Union, China, and Russia. But now you flip-flop because if they're nothing else, they're hypocrites. The Trump administration has nowhere near this level of cooperation, and thus it's at best unclear whether Iran will feel a similar economic squeeze. What's more, Trump's sanctions have the added effect of benefiting Russia. You just said they were our friends. As it stands to gain handsomely in the absence of Iranian oil on the world market. Without a free flow of Iranian crude, Europe and Asia will undoubtedly turn more to Russia as an alternative source. Listen, Moscow also wants to throw Iran a lifeline by setting up a scheme to purchase Iranian oil for domestic consumption, thereby freeing up more crude for Russia to sell abroad. That makes absolutely no sense. That makes absolutely no sense. You want to buy your competitor's oil so you can sell more of yours? That makes no sense. That's stupid. All right. At the same time, the McFarland goes on, Trump's Iran policy is further alienating the U.S. from its European allies. While the big European companies like Total and Siemens have pulled out of Iran to avoid American secondary sanctions, the EU is working on a so-called special purpose vehicle independent from the U.S. dollar-dominated international financial system to facilitate trade between small and medium-sized European companies and Iran. You know what they just said there? Abandoning the dollar. We're done. Whether this mechanism succeeds or not remains to be seen. But the damage has been done. Our own allies have started to break away from the American-dominated global financial system, something the Russians and Chinese have been pushing for some time. I thought you said they were our partners. I still don't get it. Thereby undermining U.S. economic might and global leadership. To be clear, Iran will feel some economic pain. Its currency value has already plummeted, and its oil exports have been cut by about 1 million barrels per day. But the Iranians have weathered similar storms before, and it's likely that Trump's maximum pressure campaign will fail to materialize, essentially closing the door on the possibility of Iran's returning to the negotiating table and thereby lessening the probability of creating the conditions for regime change. Even if Trump succeeds in near zeroing out Iran's oil exports, he'd face another big problem, a spike in gas prices at home. I thought he said that Russia was ready to push in and sell its oil. This guy will just say whatever. The bottom line is that Trump abandoning the JCPOA and reimposing sanctions is a bad policy. It drives us further from Europe, undermines the credibility of America's diplomatic toolkit, threatens U.S. global economic leadership, potentially rewards rivals like Russia. I thought they were partners, but they're rivals and partners, whatever is convenient, and unlocks the constraints on Iran racing toward a bomb. Iran is not racing toward a bomb, y'all. Indeed, when the dust settles from Trump's sanctions, the Iran nuclear deal will either be on life support, waiting for a new American administration to save it, or the regime in Tehran will decide that it has had enough. Iran's continued compliance with the nuclear agreement has been often overlooked, particularly considering that the main talking point of the JCPOA opponents has been that Iran will cheat. But should efforts by Europe, Russia, and others to provide Iran with enough economic... That's enough. I can't stand anymore reading any more of this guy's crap. Unfortunately, it seems that Trump has put the U.S. back where it started, only more isolated than ever before, with the path to war reopened once again. So this guy is Obama's friend. Kelly McFarland, he's Obama's friend. That's who he is. And I'm going to tell you something. So it says Kelly McFarland and Ben Armbruster. That's who wrote this article. It says, this is who's given credit for writing this article. Now, they took both of them to write that. I think probably Ben Armbruster wrote it because, according to some people, Kelly McFarland's not that smart. And I'm going to read you that in a second. Kelly McFarland is a U.S. diplomatic historian and director of program and research at Georgetown University Institute for the Study of Diplomacy. Armbruster is the communications director for Win Without War, a project of the Center for International Policy. International Policies. Want to take over the State Department. Okay, the Globe Post. The Globe Post is a part of the Globe Post Media, a U.S. digital news organization that is publishing the world's best targeted news sites. I don't know what that means. I don't care to know anymore. So this is something else that I found about about Professor McFarland. Okay? This is Kelly McFarland, professor in the International Studies Department at Georgetown University, Washington, D.C. Rate this professor. Some of you might be familiar with this. This is something that was not available when I was a student, but you can go on here and you can, give a review on a teacher that you had. And other kids can go on this and try to decide if they want to take a teacher or not. Okay. So, he's in the International Studies Department, Georgetown University. Okay. This is a rating that one of the students gave him. And this is the latest one. I'll read the latest one. This is from this past semester that was finished in the spring. 5/6/19. They wouldn't have rated them for the fall yet. 5/6/2019. Rating is poor, 2 stars. Overall quality, 3 stars. It says lecture heavy, lots of homework, so many papers. Would not recommend. He goes off on tangents and likes hearing himself speak. He cusses a weird amount and honestly doesn't come off as that intelligent. His feedback was useless and it's tough to figure out what he wants. Nice enough guy, but not a great professor. So a lot of these people are put in these positions to be puppets. And they're put in these positions to be puppets. They're given these big salaries, like they tried to do to Norman Dodd. Just Norm, don't worry about it. He said they would pat him on the head. Don't worry about it, Norm. Go play golf, play tennis, and, pretty soon you'll be able to retire with a great salary. And then we'll just use you to say stuff every now and then. Put your name on this article, and we got you as an expert. You got all these degrees and stuff we done gave you, and you're going to be an expert, and you're going to fool the people into thinking you know what you're talking about because he just told us that Donald Trump is going to push us straight into a war. We need to cry out for Obama. Okay, and remember that was about Iran, oil, bankers, and the Middle East. So we'll pick up there at part 2. Maybe I'll read this dream before I go. Maybe I shouldn't, but I will. And then I'll start with the dream again. So, this family had one older son, 17 or so, and 2 young sons that were toddlers. Brad Pitt played the teen, and the 2 young sons were played by young boys that looked like him too. There was trouble brewing, and he was joking, telling them about knowing they didn't understand, and they were playing. So it was a movie. It was kind of like I was watching a movie. And so Brad Pitt is there. He's like 17. He's looking like himself, but about 17. And then these 2 little boys supposed to be his little brother, like 2 and 3 years old. And they're playing around down at his feet. You know how kids play around. And the world is just in horrible trouble. And he's talking. It's like a disaster movie. And he's talking to the little boys like, you guys have no clue what's going on. And they're just playing and giggling like little kids do. So then... So he was also joking with talk of how if they had girlfriends, if they were old enough to have girlfriends, their girlfriends would be after him. He'd be able to steal their girlfriends if they were old enough to have girlfriends. That was like a joke. So there was another area. Tom Hanks and someone else was there, and they were dealing with the conflict. And I was there looking through an old box or a trunk of my things, which had some pink and green sequined fabric. And another thing, I was wondering how I could repurpose them. At some point, my mother was making very tiny hats I don't know what that part has to do with anything. I'm just going to skip that part about her. So anyway, at one part about my mother that I will mention, she tried to get me to put like some dye in my hair. And I was like, I'm not putting that stuff in my hair. So, anyway. So, to the area where Tom Hanks and this other person was. And I thought maybe the other person could have been the mother of Brad Pitt and the two boys. So there was massive civil unrest everywhere. It was being televised and broadcast. There was a right side and a wrong side. But the thing was, when you listen to them describe wrong or right, either side could be the wrong side they were describing. The descriptions fit either side, depending on your point of view. I wasn't on either side, but one side seemed to be clearly, totally wrong and evil and wild and causing all of the trouble. I guess this was pretty much characterized as liberal versus conservative, or status quo versus change. As I sat near the box, listening to all the news reports of the clashes and turmoil, I heard one of the wild young liberals speaking, and I realized that each side of them, the right and the wrong and the liberal and the conservative, each side hears themselves as the good guys, hands down, no contest, and doesn't question to think any differently, because the narrative that they have been given to discuss and argue about is forest and trees. I'll explain that in the next video. They both fit right and wrong. So the question of who's wrong is moot. They are both wrong. Then I made like a little thing, like a little continuum. You know how we're told that you have the left and you have the right, and the left is the liberals and the right is the conservatives. Okay? And then you have this continuum. And then you have these two extremes, conservatism and liberalism. And this is the narrative that they've been giving us to fight over. This is the bone, and the only bone that we have to pick on. But it's not so. So, right, this is the way it really looks. Sorry. Okay. So this is actually what it really looks like. It doesn't look like, left and right. It looks like God, conservatives, and liberals. Hope you can see that. Pull this up so I can see what my screen looks like. Okay. So you have God, conservatives, and liberals. You have right. You start over here. This is the liberals. You have wrong, absolutely wrong, dead wrong, messed up, shut up. You're godless and it's ridiculous. Then you have less wrong, which is the conservatives. And many people are satisfied here being a conservative. They're not right. They're not doing things God's way. That God has somewhat against you. You did a whole lot of stuff wrong, but I have somewhat against you. You didn't go all the way to righteousness. You're just doing a little better than them. So this is the way God looks at it. See, these people see themselves, well, I'm better than him. But the way God looks at it, this is God, he's hot. He would want us to be hot. But if you're not going to be hot, he'd rather you be cold than lukewarm. Because he'll spit you out. So conservatives, give it up. Get all the way to God or shut up because you're even worse than these people. Even though you're not. But in God's eyes, yes, you are. And what God says is right. Now, clearly, these people are wacko. But look at you. You're satisfied to wallow in this lousy system that we have. Let God come back and burn it all up. Yeah, this system is rotten. Yeah, it needs to be taken down. But not by the trick that we're about to fall into. Get all the way to God or you're going to die with the rest of the people. So right is what God says it is. And that is exactly what God says. Not your almost, close enough, better than what they're doing version of right. God went to great trouble in the Bible to demonstrate his hatred for mixture. Holiness is purity and sin is adulterating what God set apart as holy. And so he calls it whoredom. Adultery is mixing a wife or a husband with a side person. And idolatry is mixing strange and other gods with the worship of the Lord. So as God told Moses, see that you make it according to the pattern that you saw in the mount. God wants us to do exactly what he told us to do, not get close. And I said a long time ago, I had some kind of dream, and at the end of it, I wrote down, I believed from the dream, from all that the dream informed me, that racism had created Obama. If this system, if Europeans, if the Israelis, when they were in their homeland, I'm talking about when God put them there, not when they put themselves there. Them putting themselves there now is something like when they refused to go into the promised land when Moses originally told them. And then the next day they said, okay, we'll go. And they tried to go and Moses said, don't go, God's not with you. And they tried to go and got slaughtered. You can't go into that land without God's invitation. And he said, you're not going to see my face anymore until you say, blessed is he that come in the name of the Lord. If they're not acknowledging Jesus Christ as the great I am, God doesn't have them in that land. He'll still receive them if they accept the Lord, whoever does. But the rest of them, God told me they're Decepticons. The people that are over in Israel now, God told me they are Decepticons. And you know what that fits with that scripture that says, those that say they're Jews and are not, but do lie. And I'm going to be real clear. Black people are not the Hebrews. No, you're not. I've made a couple of 2 or 3 videos about it. You're not. If you are a follower of the Lord Jesus Christ, he loves you and you are a Jew. But you're a Jew in the same way that anybody who's going to heaven is a Jew, one inwardly, whose heart is circumcised. By the spirit of adoption, whereby we cry, Abba, Father. You are a Jew. And you're not going to come short in any good thing. But this Hebrew Israelite thing is founded in pride. And the Lord also told me they're going to worship Obama because they're racists. And I don't have no doubt about this stuff. God has showed me too much stuff that's actually going on in the world that I had no idea about. Okay. All right, so the rest of the dream. Okay, so then some time passed. Some time passed by. I don't know how much time, so just some time passed by. Maybe a decade, maybe two. Okay, and Tom Hanks was older, and he was a general or very powerful and conducting resistance to the world forces, to the wild forces, sorry. But he was clueless. And I knew that the young boys were somewhere on opposite sides of the conflict, thoroughly brainwashed for their respective sides and ready to kill each other for it. All right. So then I'll save the rest of it for later, but there's more to it. And I'm going to make a part 2. God bless.